Well, hey, everyone. Welcome to Leadership Pathway, first Thursday webinar. It's not only the first Thursday of January, it's the first Thursday of the year. So happy New Year's, everyone. If you're watching live with us, welcome. We got a great guest. I'll get to that in a second. Before we do anything, though, I want to give a shout out to Norton Creative, who makes this possible. I'm going to drop their link there in the show notes. And if you're live, you can click, or YouTube or wherever this winds up eventually someday. If you are sitting in with us live, well, you're welcome to there in the chat box, type a comment, a question as we move forward. And if you're listening to this in the future on YouTube or a podcast or something, I guess you'll have to call the old-fashioned way or text us or email me. But we love doing these. We learn so much. Leadership Pathway, if you don't know, we're all about helping local churches find, support, and develop people, the next generation primarily, but all ages, to help them with their staffing crisis that we're in. And just last week, we're finishing up this book. And last week I was Googling for one of the chapters, are there enough? And I would put like firefighter, policeman, teachers, bankers, CEOs, coach, on and on and on, pastors, and each electricians, plumbers. That was an interesting one. Each business sector had their own statistic about how many were retiring or quitting, and there aren't enough replacing them. Are we all wedding photographers living in our parents' basement? We don't know. Where are people? We don't know, but we have a staffing crisis, and the church is no different. And that's why Leadership Pathway 7 years ago began. And so that's how we serve churches. And so once a month, we take a moment, we learn from friends like Mitch, who is with us today. Mitch Harrison, welcome, from refillcoaching.com. I'm going to drop in the link. Hold on. I'm going to put it there for those of you that are live in the room. Welcome, Mitch. Tell us a little about yourself.
Thanks, Dave. We have been friends for a long, long time, and love the work you're doing, and I think it's so important these days. Yeah, I am these days. I used to be an executive pastor at Canyon Ridge Church in Las Vegas. I still work with them, teach there occasionally, and help with some leadership development and help with this personal replenishment issue with the staff there. And these days, I have find myself through this consulting practice that I started, Refill Coaching, working with business leaders, working with businesses, speaking all over the country. And it sounds like really impressive. Like I had this carefully concocted plan to do all this stuff, man. God just opened some crazy doors, and I kind of found myself in the middle of it. And so work with business leaders and businesses, also work with churches, church leaders, particularly and specifically around the issue of personal replenishment. And how do we stay at our very best all or most of the time in a world that just seems to want to burn us out more and more all the time? So that's what I'm doing these days. Yeah.
That's great. I love it. Before we dive in, Mitch, tell us, who was Mitch, age 18 to 25? We hadn't planned on talking about that, but I love asking people that are on this. Who were you at age 18? What'd you do between ages 18 and 25?
Well, when I was 18, I was still playing football. I just finished up a massively successful high school football career, no. And I'd had some success, but I was a pretty good high school football player. I was college player, and transitioning into play junior college football for a little bit, was thinking about what my life was supposed to be about. And I felt God kind of tapping on my shoulder to do the thing that I swore I would never do, which was go into the ministry, and particularly go into youth ministry. And so by 20, I ended up landing a job at this church, working as a youth pastor. By 25, I had totally screwed it up and was looking for something else to do. And, God just saw fit to keep dragging me into ministry.
You're at age 20, you were in school still doing this, or what was that?
Yeah, I was. I was at Azusa Pacific and was playing football there. And I knew this pastor who called me up and said, "Hey, you want to be a youth pastor for me out here?" And it was a little too far away for me to keep playing football and do that. So I had to make a choice. And I gave up my last year of eligibility and went and stepped into ministry, and have never looked back, man. Full-time ministry since I was about 20.
Until now. When did you move to Vegas?
Oh man, 24 years ago, November 1st, we packed up and moved to Vegas. I was over in Central California in Fresno, where I grew up actually. And, again, swore I would never move to Vegas. My wife's parents lived over there. We'd go visit, we'd go to church with them. And every time we'd go back to Fresno, go back home, we'd have the same conversation in the car about how moving to Vegas would be the stupidest thing and how we would never do it. And then, of course, God says, well, let's just see about that. And ended up accepting an invitation to come on staff there, and then stayed for a long, long time. And ended up being executive pastor there at the end of it. Yeah.
I love it. Okay. I'm looking at your website, refillcoaching.com. You talk about burnout. So for this conversation, can you give us the refill coaching? Give us your definition. What do you mean when you say burnout? What are you talking to?
Yeah. A lot of people have ideas about what burnout is, and we feel like we can get burned out in a week. I don't think burnout happens in a day. I don't think it happens in a week. I think you can get burned down for sure. I think you can get stressed in a day or in a week. But real burnout happens when we lose the ability to recover. So, you have those bad days. You feel like, oh my gosh, I cannot do another thing. I can't think another thought. I can't have another idea. I can't answer another phone call. But you get a good night's sleep. You get up the next morning and go, okay, here we go again. Burnout is when you can't recover. Burnout is when recovery looks like it's a million miles away, and you start having those thoughts of, man, not only can I not do this tomorrow, I don't think I can do this for a while. And that's the typical sign of burnout.
Have you studied it? Have you lived it? Have you researched it? How do you come to that understanding?
Well, listen, my research into burnout began one night in the middle of the Las Vegas Strip. I was staggering down the middle of the street, and not for the typical reason people end up staggering down the middle of the Strip. Let's be clear.
Oh, look, half the people just signed off. They're just like, click, I'm with this guy.
Sorry about that, Dave. I just totally tanked your webinar here. But no, I was running a half marathon. About mile 11, the wheels came off. Okay. And I went from feeling about as good as I had ever felt running a half marathon to about as bad as I had ever felt in my life in about a half mile. And it's because I didn't fuel the machine properly, right? I hadn't eaten enough. I had been trying to lose a little weight and be a little lean and mean, and I hadn't ramped it back up, and I hit the wall. The typical thing, happens to people running or riding a bike or whatever, And I cannot tell you how bad I felt. It was unbelievable how bad I felt. And it was the recovery part that was even worse. It was like, when am I ever going to start feeling like I can go running again? Well, that was kind of this experience that I went through that became an indicator to me to what happened a few years later, because a few years later, the same thing happened in my office. I found myself sitting in my office after a long meeting with our HR director about another problem. Ministry, man, there's a problem a day, right? I mean, it's the problem of the week and whatever, right? But for whatever reason, man, after this particular round, I was sitting in my office going, I can't keep going here. And it was like, I can hang on for about 4 months, and that's about it. I don't know what happens after that. And it was.
Why did you think 4 months? What was it about 4 months, do you think?
I have no idea. But you know how we kind of imagine the future and imagine what's happening out there. This was that thing I was talking about earlier. I could not imagine recovering or doing anything else that would not leave me feeling as wiped out as I was feeling. I had no resilience. Like, somebody would come and ask me what I wanted for lunch, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have no energy to figure that out right now. That kind of thing. And that lack of resilience, that lack of ability to handle it was the indicator that something was really wrong. And it was where my research into burnout actually began without really knowing it. I had never felt like that before. Again, I played high school football, college football. I knew how to push. I knew how to go. I knew how to keep at stuff. I'd been in ministry for, 30 something years at the time. You know what I mean? I knew how to keep at this thing, but there just came a point where I couldn't do that anymore, and began to really realize there was going to be some recovery needed that was different from just the typical go take a couple days off and you're fine.
Mitch, I've never worked for you. I've worked around you, right? Been mutual friends and all this sort of stuff. You strike me as one of the more mild-mannered executive leaders. Let's say it that way. In church or not church. In fact, my wife, Kristen, this morning, she's like, as I'm coming up the commute up the stairs to where I sit, she's downstairs. She's like, have a good conversation with Mitch. He's one of the nice ones. That's what she said. So we all see you, but like that kind of guy. But who are you when you're burnt out? Who are you when you're not you? You know what I'm saying? Like, how does it manifest itself when someone does ask you for your Chipotle order? Do you snipe at them? Do you bite, or do you just shut down? What was going on?
No, I think because I'm an introvert, it all goes inward. You know, I shut down. I'm quiet. There's a very dark cloud kind of very evident over me and around me, and this low burn irritation and anger shows up. Resentment shows up, and then I get kind of this phantom anxiety, you know, where I think a lot of people in ministry get this, especially people that are wired like executive pastors or youth pastors or people who are put in a position of responsibility. I would get this kind of low grade anxiety that I couldn't put my finger on what makes me anxious. I'm just anxious. I just have those butterflies, like I must be missing something. I must be forgetting something. And it turns very inward and very quiet for me. So yeah, that's the way I kind of know, like I call them early warning signs. We all ought to identify these things that start showing up in us first when we start getting burned out. Like maybe it's irritation, maybe it's apathy, you know, maybe it's escapism. We just want to go, forget it, you know, and just walk away. Maybe we get these, you know, some temptation to, you know, drink too much or things. There's things that start showing up first when the depletion sets in, and we ought to identify those as early warning signs to go, I need to do something now before this turns into a pervasive kind of symptom that takes over and stays with me all the time.
Okay, burnout defined. You use the word replenishment, which a lot of people don't use. I think I said that to you when our team met with you a couple of years ago. Now you took us through a thing at the breakfast table or something. How do you live replenished? What is replenishment? Can you define that for us?
Yeah, for sure. Well, you know, obviously I'm not the first guy to think about this. Lance Witt literally wrote the book called Replenish, and you ought to go get Lance's book called Replenish and read that. Lots of people have talked about it way back to Wayne Cordero from New Hope in Hawaii, right? He wrote a book about this too. But it's basically this idea that for all of us, we have a limited amount of energy. And the things that we do are going to drain us and deplete us. And what we have got to do is balance the stress that comes into our life with the replenishment, with the things that are back up, so that we don't end up emptying our tank out. And that's what I did at that half marathon, right? Too much stress, too much energy, not enough refilling, refueling, replenishing coming back in, and I ran out of gas. Same thing happened to me at work. Too much stress for too long, too little replenishment, and we all know where that's heading, right? It also works the other way around. We ought to talk about that a little bit too later on. But the replenishing side is this: do you have things coming into your life that are refilling you to match the stresses that you're experiencing? Yeah. So, for instance, I got the stress of being the executive pastor of a church. I've got the stresses of being a dad of young kids. I got the stresses of being a youth pastor. I've got the stresses of handling, you know, jobs in ministry. I got the stress of leading other leaders. Do I have things that I am doing on a regular basis that are actually putting back what is being depleted in me from taking care of those responsibilities and handling those stressors that are taking it out of me. And go ahead, Dave.
Well, I'm just, this is where, as Christ followers, we get ourselves into trouble. Because, yes, I do, Mitch. I listen to K-Love every morning driving to my church job.
Yeah.
And I have forced devotions with the staff once a week. And I got a small group that I'm cramming for 20 minutes before everyone shows up and filling in the worksheet, fill in the blank. So I'm doing these things. These things. Why isn't this working?
Yeah. And I agree with you, Dave. I think we have in the church oftentimes told people, hey, man, if you have better quiet time, you're good. That's what you need. You need to be closer to Jesus. And let me be quick to say, you need to be closer to Jesus. We do need that. Let's not discount that at all. But the real question is, am I matching the things that are depleting me with things that are filling me? So the culture right now is enamored with this work-life balance idea, right? The idea being, if I get the amount of hours for work and for life in the right measure, that somehow everything will be great. Yeah. And the problem that I found is that just because you drive away from the office does not mean that your stress is over with. Right. Like in one of the most challenging seasons of leadership I had, my wife ends up with breast cancer. So now I'm driving home from work or driving away from the house and leaving my wife, who just had chemo 2 days ago, in the hands of her friends or her family, so that I can go get done when I need to get done at the office and then try to get back home. Listen, the stresses of life at that moment were way bigger than the stresses of work, even though the stresses of work were huge. And I started to find out that the stresses of life were actually exaggerating and multiplying the stresses of work. So work-life balance, I think, is a myth. There is no ideal number of hours or flexibility or things like that. You're going to have stress, things that deplete you in your life, in your work, in your relationships, in your parenting, in every direction. The question is, do you have the right kinds of things that replenish what you have been depleted? And so, for instance, most people, again, take that wholesale. I think we ought to get much more specific about it. And the things that I talk about in the workshops that I do with churches, I do this with to help leaders put individual plans together that lean into these 5 things that we all need. The first one, obviously, is rest. Am I getting the kind of rest that I need? And what I mean by rest is, are you taking time to stop working? Like Fred Flintstone, you remember, I'm totally dating myself here, right? But remember Fred Flintstone at the beginning of every one of his episodes, right? Fred knew exactly when it was time to stop working, because that sundial on his wrist and pull the bird, and then he'd come sliding down and go to get Barney Rubble, and they go out to the movies. He had a clear signal of when it was time to stop working. We have taken this little device right here and erased every line between work and not work. Yeah. And so I think we've got to set aside clear times, clear boundaries when we say, this is a period of time where I do not work. Yeah. And now you'll do other things with that. You'll go take a walk the dogs, go for a bike ride, do other stuff. But to set aside clear boundaries around, this is when I work and this is when I stop working, because most of our work happens right here. Yeah. And we've got to get really good at beginning to say, it's time to shut this off and to go into another kind of mode. So rest is key to replenishing. We need rest from our work. I think there's a Bible word for that called the Sabbath, that God had to put a command. He put it in the top 10 and put more verbiage around Sabbath than around killing people, around adultery, around idolatry, around any other of the commands. He spent more time writing about the Sabbath in the 10 Commandments than any other thing he told us to do. So us learning how to have complete rest where we stop working, both externally and internally. The second thing I think we've got to have is we've got to take some time for what I call release, which is unpacking our emotional baggage. I love what Andy Stanley says. He says, I don't want to smuggle emotional baggage from last month into next month, or last week into next week, or I would say, last year into next year.
Yeah.
And so when do we have regular habits and rhythms where we unpack the heavy emotional things that we carry with us, things that have made us sad? You and I were talking about our mom's health condition right now.
Mm-hmm.
Things, they're just sad, and
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing more to say than it's just sad.
Yeah.
But when do we unpack that with somebody so that we can carry that load appropriately instead of letting it, just add up into this enormous ball of grief that eventually wears us out from the inside? We got to unpack things that make us angry. Like if you wanted to pick a job that was not going to piss you off every once in a while, ministry is probably not the one to pick, right? I mean, there's going to be things that just make us really mad, things that are not the way they ought to be, that we just go, dang it. Well, we got to unpack that anger somewhere. You cannot just keep stuffing that and expect to be healthy and to be full of life. And repressed and undealt with anger will just wear you out. And it wore me out. I mean, there would be things that just made me so mad, but I felt like in my role, I couldn't talk to anybody, And so I didn't want to unload all that on my wife. I didn't want to, I couldn't talk to people at work about it. And so we've got to have places to unpack those things, unpacking the things that make us afraid, instead of, carrying anxiety with us all the time. Where are the regular rhythms and who are the people that we get with that we can just unpack some of the stuff that we're carrying? Ask ourselves the question, what am I carrying? And who do I talk to about that? And so I call this release, regular habits and rhythms of release, of unpacking our emotional baggage. I think we need to lean into our purpose. I call it receive. This is time we spend with God to reconnect around God's calling for us, who God has made each one of us to be. This is where, Dave, I believe this is where our energy actually comes from. I mean, think of how many people lose energy because they lose a clear sense of their calling. They're standing there with their hands on their hips in the middle of some ministry event going, why am I even doing this?
Yeah.
Why did I sign up for this? And we forget why we started. And so we can't remember why we should keep going. And we've got to spend time with regular habits that reconnect us with God's calling and God's purpose for each one of us, because that's what puts fuel in the tank. You show me someone that has a clear sense of mission, calling, and purpose. They will go to the ends of the earth. They have energy to burn. Mm-hmm. But when we start losing sight of that, and here's the problem with it. Let me just say this. We wait for inspiration to find us. Yeah. Like we sign up, we go to a conference and we go, I hope inspiration is going to find me at this conference, right? We sign up for, whatever leadership event we go to, and we're going, I hope somebody has something good for me. Yeah. Look, we've got to get more intentional about it. We've got to go looking for inspiration. We've got to go seeking out those places where we meet with God and God pours his calling back into us. Maybe it's through a person or through a mentor, through a group of friends, wherever it is. But to find places where our sense of calling is replenished on a regular basis, not just once a year at the once a year at a conference is great, but man, there ought to be monthly and weekly times when we get reconnected to our sense of calling. And then the last two are the ones that are easy. Like, where do you find recreation? Where do you go have some just laugh out loud fun? I know there's some people that probably think I'm a little nuts for doing this, but just this past December month ago, we loaded up our family. I got adult kids, that are in their 20s, and we loaded us all up, went to Disneyland, and spent 4 days down at Disneyland because we just love that kind of thing, and for no other reason than to have fun together. That was it. And we just had a blast. It was so refreshing to just go have some fun, to have some recreation. You ride your bike, man. We go, do the stuff we do physically. People go on hikes. I walk my dogs. All the stuff we do just for the fun of it. They call it enjoyment for a reason. And I'll tell you, just like sadness and anger and those kind of things are heavy emotions, joy is the helium of emotions. It is the one that makes us lighter, right? And so in recreation is where we go and just find fun. And man, especially for people in the I know our work is serious. I know our work is consequential. But I got to say, man, we are some of the most unfun people in the ministry because we're so dang. I was like this too. You asked me what I was like. I was so serious, man. I was so earnest and just lost completely the value that our God is a joyful, happy, fun, loving God. Yeah. And so we got to go have some fun. And then the last thing is the relationship part. We got to get with people that we dearly love, people that we just love being together with, relating with, and hang out with those people. Make specific time to be with those kind of people. We put our people in our churches together in small groups of people and just go in there and share your life together and do all this stuff. And often in the ministry, man, we're the most isolated people in the church. And I just encourage you, wherever you got to go to find some relationships, go and find those. These are the things that replenish us. These 5 things, rest, emotional release, receiving again our sense of calling, recreation, and relationships. These, people go, man, where'd you come up with that list? It's like, dude, those are the 5 things that all of us reach for anyways when we're burned out, right? I mean, when I get tanked, what do? I go, oh my gosh, I gotta go get some rest. I gotta get away from this work for a while. And then we say things like, man, it would be great to just go have some fun. Or just like, maybe I just need to go hiking, or maybe I need to go to a conference and get myself restirred about why I'm doing. These are the 5 things that we normally and naturally reach for anyways. I just kind of collected them up and said, maybe we need to put a plan together of regular habits and rhythms, daily, periodic, or annually, of how all of these things fit together into a plan for my personal replenishment that matches the stress that I'm experiencing in my job. So that's how I think we got to do it.
You said plan.
Yeah.
And I remember the grid you laid down on the table.
Yeah.
Wherever we were having breakfast. And it strikes me that we say to young leaders, residents, if your fun's not in your calendar, it's never going to happen, right? You don't have it. But I would tell you, since I kind of see I see all of these topics through the lens of what about the 22-year-old? Because the 22-year-old is working for the super old veteran 32-year-old. And they've been at this for a decade, right? They're a purple unicorn. They're still going. And if you ask them, what do you do for fun? They don't have a good answer. And who are your friends? Now, if you said, are you in a group? They would say, yeah, because they're made to be in a group. But where are they where are they releasing, unpacking this stuff? Do they talk about their therapist? Do they have a counselor? Yeah. Do they even have good friends? Most don't. Why? Because they were hired to get stuff done, and they've been getting it done for a decade. And now we hand them the next generation. Speak a little bit about, because I guarantee everyone listening to this is like, oh man, Mitch is reading my mail. I'm exhausted. I just came through Christmas and I'm already saying things like, if I can just get through Easter. And they've got a resident onboarding this week with them.
Yeah.
How do we not pass this stuff on?
Yeah. I got to say, there is no magic pill here. There is no silver bullet here. There's nothing but all of us deciding that we are going to prioritize this and to do it first. Like here's the most helpful thing I ever heard of giving away anything. So, I heard somebody say, maybe it might have been, I'm not sure who it was, somebody smart, like that. But they said you should always give your money first, right? Tithe first, and then figure out how to live on the rest of your tithe.
Right.
I really believe that we ought to do the replenishment stuff first, to put that in our calendar first, to ask myself in the storm of all the stuff I've got to do, what kind of replenishment am I going to need? And then put it on my calendar first, and then prioritize the rest of your time. It is literally like a tithe of our. It's what God did to us when he instituted a Sabbath one day a week. He said, look, you're going to take one whole day before you do anything. This is like, it's commandment number, like 4 or something like that. I mean, it's way up there.
Yeah.
He said, prioritize this where you are not going to work. Put it in there first, and then with the rest of your time, figure out how you're going to make it work.
Yeah.
Because he knew we were going to need. He knew we had limits. He made us with limits, and we need to put that in first. And I would just say to you, before you start making ministry plans, before you put your strategies in place, before you do all that other stuff, to look at to ask yourself the question: what am I going to need to keep my tank full?
Mm-hmm.
Look at those 5 areas and say, I'm going to put things literally on my calendar and block out time for these things first. And then I'm going to schedule meetings. Then I'm going to put plans in place for ministry.
It's good. My wife says if it's not in the calendar, it's not real.
Oh, man,
so
it's totally imaginary.
Night fun, days off, leave me alone. That's what her calendar, you try to get a meeting. And she leads people to think that way. And here's let me give you a common, the churches we work with that are leading Gen Z, 20 to 25-year-olds in residency. It's like more than an internship. It's a 2-year thing. They're coaching. It takes a couple of months. And then this super old veteran 34-year-old is saying things like, she won't text me back. I email her and text her at night. This is after hours, of course, or Saturday mornings, or on what's supposed to be the day off. They're just in a normal culture. It's culturally normal.
Yeah.
That they don't turn it off. What do you say to that? Yeah. What do you say to that leader?
Yeah. Let me say, first of all, I understand. Like I'm in that, man. I've been in that. I've been that guy. I totally get it. Man, the work of God never stops. There's always something to deal with. And you're always thinking of those things at the least opportune time. You're heading into a movie theater because you're out on a date with your wife finally. And you go, oh, wait, I got to send that text or I got it. And you send it. I totally get that. Right. But let me say a couple of things here about this. Number one, we cannot violate a commandment of God and think he is going to bless our ministry. Yeah. I just don't think you can do that. Like if I said, I'm just going to ignore one of the commandments, so I'm going to do all the others just right. I'm not going to steal from anybody. I'm trying not to kill anybody, today. I'll do all the rest of the commandments, but I think I'm just going to go ahead and keep committing adultery. You think God, obviously God is never going to bless that.
And but our HR policies are written in such a way. That's the thing.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
You will lose your job. We would all lose our job doing that. We won't lose our job breaking the other one that you're going to talk about, the Sabbath one.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so we've got to begin to see it in that way. And I would just say this. What I have realized about myself is, if I am going to show up at my very best, because here's the deal, beating burnout, not burning out is a terrible goal. It's a terrible goal. For instance, if my goal for my marriage was, I'm going to not get divorced, like whatever else we do, we're going to not get divorced. I mean, if that was the goal for my marriage, you'd go, bro, you probably want to rethink your goal a little bit. Set the bar a little higher than just don't get divorced, right? I mean, let's face it, some of us are doing pretty good to keep that going, but I mean, there's a higher bar than just don't get divorced. Beating burnout is a bad goal. Yeah. Right. What we want to do is we want to be at our best. We want to live at our best. We want to live the full, abundant life that Jesus said he made available to us. And what oftentimes happens is I work with church staffs. I do this exercise with them to help them define what it would look like. Like if you as a person were an 8 out of 10, tank was full to an 8 out of 10, what would you look like? And, optimistic and all these different kinds of things, right? They list. And then I ask them to do the same thing on the other side. What do you look like when you're a 3, depleted to a 3? And they're, anxious and irritable and all that stuff, right? And so we get this picture. And then I just ask them, how are you? Like on your church staff, how are you? And every time I have done this with the church staff, the number is about 4.6.
Yeah, right.
For the staff. Sure. And here's what I say to them. And I don't mean to be a jerk about it. I don't mean to get in people's face about it. But what I say is, here's the problem with that. We tell everybody on the weekend that an 8 is possible. That with Jesus and the life that he offers to us, living with peace and living with purpose and being present, that is possible for us with Jesus. And yet we have settled out to live at about a 4 or 5 on the church staff. Yeah. And so we have got to get it into our head again that we are doing nobody any favors burning ourselves out. Right. In fact, I feel like if I'm going to call myself a leader of anything, I owe it to the people that I lead to show up like an 8, to show up at my best, to show up as a joyful person that's full of peace, is full of the fruit of the Spirit. I owe it to those people to show up like that. Bad bosses and bad leaders, oh my gosh, they just, they've wreaked havoc on all of how many of us, right, Dave, have worked for a bad leader somewhere along the way or had to deal with the fallout from a bad leader.
I've been a bad leader. I'm cringing thinking about the Saturday emails.
Oh my gosh, man. How many people are probably on this podcast, or want to be watching this later on going, oh my, who's that guy to tell? I mean, I worked for him or worked with him. I mean, there were times in my life, man, when I showed up enormously burned out and bad. And, the havoc that wreaks. And so what I've started realizing today is if I'm going to be at my best, that will not happen on accident.
Right.
That I will not drift in that direction. Right. I will drift in the direction of being irritable and anxious and all those negative side things. So I've got to have a plan to be that. And I've got to put these things in place first. And if you want me to show up at my very best, you're probably going to have to put up with me taking a day off and you're not hearing from me. You're not being available sometimes. You're going to have to put up with some of that stuff if you were going to get me at my best, because trust me, you do not want me at my worst. And my wife and kids got too much of the worst. My employees, the people, my coworkers, the people they got too much of that. I want to be different than that these days.
So I do believe, Mitch, this is something that Gen Z is going to help us fix. I do believe if you're over 30 and you're listening or watching this and you're leading somebody younger than 24 and they're not going to reply to you after 5 o'clock. They're not going to reply to you on Saturday or whatever your day off is supposed to be. If you have shared your calendars with them and you have meetings on your day off, they're looking at that and you're going to have a hard time leading them. Now, the other side of that coin for that young leader is they're chasing that myth of the work-life balance. And when they go home, they don't answer the boss, but they are continuously scrolling and doing all sorts of anxiety producing behaviors that have to be dealt with, right? I'm not saying it's not like they're right, we're wrong, but this is one thing that we're, for the last couple of years, I think people who are leading them for the first time, they're learning. They're learning. And quite honestly, it puts pressure on the work hours to be better, to not waste time, whatever the days are supposed to be, all of those kinds of things that happen down line. How do we steward the best work week we can so we can have a day off? So when we're supposed to be home, we're home and fully engaged. I just think this is rare. This is rare air for normal churches, and by that I mean big churches that aren't. They're big churches, but they're still small companies, right? They don't have an HR team. They might have one person. They might be a church of 50. They might have 20 employees, let's say. But they're hired to get stuff done and to kill it, as we would say in our 20s. It's really, really hard. These are hard lessons to learn.
And Dave, to your point about how Gen Z is going to help us fix this, and you mentioned earlier the leadership crisis that's happening. There's this shortage of leaders in every direction, which is why Leadership Pathway does what Leadership Pathway does, because we got to maximize that. But let me tell you where this is all coming from and why people are talking about this. Again, I do a lot of work in the business community. I spend a lot of time looking at facts and figures happening in the business community and what they're dealing with in terms of finding leaders and finding even employees for their companies. It's worse in the church, but I think it's for this reason. It starts with a math problem. 73 million boomers, like I'm the last of the boomer generation, right? I mean, I'm the you could probably call me the first of the Gen Xers because I'm so late to the game, right? Yeah. But my year was that cusp year. But boomers have exited the labor force, right? You are probably not going to hire another boomer ever to do anything. They have exited the job. They're 60 years old and older. 73 million of them. They've been replaced by 63 million Gen Z. There's 10 million fewer people in the workforce right now, which I believe is why labor costs have gone up. Anytime you have less of something and greater demand, prices are going to go up. And I think that's what happened is when this smaller generation showed up and businesses, churches started demanding more time, more effort out of that smaller number of people, they went, hey, we're not doing that. Right. And they even got their politicians to enact legislation around it, right? So to set different bars for minimum wage and all the stuff, because they said, we're not going to do all that work for those prices and we can't live. And then housing crisis and stuff helped with that too. But there were 10 million fewer people in the labor force. And of those 10 million people, they have discovered this Gen Z younger generation, some old, younger millennials too. They've discovered they don't need to work for you. Right. If you're running a big company, if you're running a church, they don't got to work for you. They don't need your job. Right. There's 2.5 jobs at some, depending on who you listen to, there's about 2.5 jobs for every unemployed person right now. They don't need your job. In fact, they'll just go down the street and work for themselves. They'll drive Uber, they'll deliver pizzas, they'll drive for DoorDash, they'll be an influencer, they'll do all the stuff that they can make plenty of money to live comfortably at home, because they're not going to go rent an apartment that costs way too much right now. They're not going to go buy a house anyways. Yeah. So out of that, what happens is they sit there and say, look, we've got the upper hand in this. In fact, there's a study that was done by Deloitte Analytics, this big company that does some surveying work into the workplace. And they said this, that 80% of millennials, or 80% of Gen Z and 82% of millennials said that policies and practices around personal well-being are important when they are deciding who to work for. Yeah. 80%. So that means when you're hiring that college grad or that seminary grad, what they are looking for when they come talk to you about a job at your church is, do you have policies and practices that are going to guarantee that you're not going to burn me out? Yeah. Do you have a culture around here that prioritizes my personal well-being, or are you going to just send me texts? And I will tell you, I have a friend that this guy who does some speaking and coaching and stuff, and he's working for this big technology company in Silicon Valley. And he got hired. They hired him, part-time to be their chief wellness officer for their company. And he's not a doctor. All he does is go around talking about presence and personal well-being and all this stuff. He interviewed 500 employees of this company. And do you know what was burning out these 500 people in this company? Emails from their supervisor on Friday night and Saturday morning on their days off. Yeah. That they were never allowed to shut it off. And he went back to the leadership team and said, hey, 500 of your employees just told me that they're getting burned out because you guys keep sending email to them on Friday night and Saturday morning. And they didn't believe him at first. But the more that he kept coming back and talking, bringing people in to talk to this leadership team, they made some serious course corrections around that. And I think we in the church, I get it. We're oftentimes a 24/7 operation, but that puts even a greater responsibility on us to be very careful about how we're creating boundaries and creating these periods of Sabbath for our people, both to honor God and to help us all in our spiritual life, but also to prioritize this idea that this younger generation really is not going to put up with it. And because of their numbers, they don't have to. Yes. They don't have to.
I would say it's taken us a few years to get there, but the answer is you got to figure it out. When a 30, and it's not people my age and your age, it's 35-year-olds who are rolling their eyes at us and saying, kids these days, nobody did this for me. Yeah. As if their path was the right path to get to where they are. So more and more, it's like, now you have to get on their page and you have to understand what all these things, you just summed it perfectly, how do we meet them where they are in a place of health so we can have a voice? Because if you don't have a voice, you're not going to lead or manage them anyway. Because they don't.
And I would say this. The younger generation is the most connected generation ever. Nobody would argue that. And here's why I bring that up. Because if you burn out a young person, if you take a Gen Z, bring them into a task and you burn them out, every single one of their friends is going to know about it. They will tell everybody. And if you're having difficulty hiring into some of those places, it might be because of the reputation that is being quietly spread through the connected networks, that that the world lives in today. Young people are just not going to do it. They're opting out. There's young people that are opting out of higher paying, higher prestige jobs in companies because they don't want the pressure. They don't want the burnout that is associated with those things. And I guarantee you they're doing the same thing with the church. And it is going to create a leadership crisis in the church if it hasn't already done that. But I think we of all people, we have the answer. Man, we have a way to say, we have a God that prioritized that for us. And as we lean into those rhythms, those priorities, we have a God that designed our body. Our body knocks us unconscious one time a day, right? God designed limits into the system, and He said, "Hey, rest. Hey, stop and enjoy life. Let me take care of running the world one day a week. Let me take care of running the world, so that you can rest and find joy and find the abundant life that I meant for you to have." We of all people have the upper hand in this whole game. The business world is looking for what the church has, and we can set a great example for them too.
Yeah, Mitch, on my side here, I can see that no one has signed off in this webinar. I can see how many people started and how many people are still with us, which tells me you're pushing buttons. It's for them. They sign on to this thinking they're going to learn something to help so they can lead a young leader, because that's Leadership Pathways thing. But I'm pretty sure you're pushing their buttons personally. So tell us how we can get in contact with you, the website or whatever.
Sure. Well, the easiest way is through the website, refillcoaching.com. And that's the easiest way to do that. My email address is just Mitch@refillcoaching, and, feel free to connect with me there. I love talking to church leaders about this thing because I know the game of that. I've been in that. And I've been in full-time ministry for almost 40 years, man. And I understand. I burned out myself. So I have a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion for people that are in that. There is no condemnation here, because, man, I needed compassion myself and benefited from so many others that helped me along the way. But yeah, contact me through refillcoaching.com. There's a place where you can just set up a half-an-hour phone call with me. Sometimes when you step in the consulting world, people go, "Oh my gosh, every time I call you, the clock is ticking and you're racking up a bill, or you got to pay me or whatever like this." Phone calls are free. Phone calls, we can talk all day, right? And talk about what your issues are and how to help solve some of those things. And I'd love to be able to serve and to help. Yeah.
All right, Mitch. I love it. You're one of the good ones. Refill Coaching.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next month here. Again, you can hit our website. There's some training things coming up in Lexington, Kentucky, and Virginia Beach. The last weekend of March in Virginia Beach, or the last week of the month, February, in Lexington, Kentucky. We'd love to have you as we talk about how to find support and develop next generation for your churches. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Take care.